Che Guevara's face is everywhere, on posters in college dorms, on t-shirts in shopping malls, spray-painted on walls from Buenos Aires to Berlin. It is one of the most reproduced images in human history. Millions recognize the beret, the defiant stare, the revolutionary aesthetic frozen in time by Alberto Korda's 1960 photograph. But almost no one can name his children. This video is not about the man on the poster. It is about the 5 people who carried his surname into adulthood. What happened to them after the revolution ended, after the myth hardened, after their father became more symbol than parent? This is not an attack on Che Guevara. It is not a tribute either. It is a chronological accounting of 5 lives shaped by proximity to one of the 20th century's most contested figures. We will move through each child's story completely, from birth to present day or death, in the order they were born. No ideology, no romanticization, just outcomes. Hilda Beatriz Guevara Gadea was born on February 15, 1956, in Mexico City. Her parents were Ernesto Che Guevara and Hilda Gadea, a Peruvian economist and political activist. At the time of her birth, Che was not yet the revolutionary icon he would become. He was a 27-year-old Argentine doctor living in exile, planning an invasion of Cuba with a small group of conspirators. Hildita, as she was called, entered the world during a period of intense preparation and uncertainty. Her father was training in the mountains outside Mexico City. Her mother was supporting the household through translation work and her political connections. Che and Hilda Gadea had met in Guatemala in 1953. Hilda was older, more politically experienced, and instrumental in shaping Che's Marxist ideology. They married in Mexico in 1955, partly out of affection and partly for practical reasons related to Che's legal status. The marriage was unstable from the beginning. Che was restless, consumed by political ambition. Hilda was practical, grounded, focused on survival. Their daughter was born into a household already marked by tension and conflicting priorities. In December 1956, when Hildita was 10 months old, Che left Mexico on the yacht Granma to invade Cuba. He would not return to his family for over 2 years. During this period, Hilda Gadea raised their daughter alone in Mexico City, with limited financial support and no certainty about her husband's survival. Hildita's early years were defined by absence. Her father was fighting in the Sierra Maestra. Her mother was managing poverty and isolation in a foreign country. The child saw her father rarely and under strained circumstances. In 1959, after the Cuban Revolution succeeded, Che brought Hilda and Hildita to Havana. The reunion was brief. Within months, Che had begun a relationship with Aleida March, a Cuban revolutionary who had fought alongside him. By 1959, Che and Hilda Gadea's marriage was effectively over. They divorced formally in 1959. Che married Aleida March almost immediately. Hildita, at 3 years old, became the child of a dissolved first marriage. Her mother returned to Peru. Hildita remained in Cuba, where she would spend most of her childhood. Hildita grew up in Havana during the 1960s and 1970s. She lived primarily with her mother when Hilda Gadea returned to Cuba, but her relationship with her father was distant. Che was absorbed in government work, then in international revolutionary projects. In 1965, he left Cuba entirely to fight in the Congo, then Bolivia. She was 11 years old when her father was captured and executed in Bolivia in 1967. By then, she had seen him only sporadically throughout her life. She was the child of Che Guevara, but she was also the child he left first. Hildita lived quietly in Cuba as an adult. She worked as a lawyer, married, and had a son named Canek Sanchez Guevara. She did not seek public attention. She did not give interviews about her father. She lived as an ordinary Cuban citizen with an extraordinary surname. Her life was marked by privacy and deliberate withdrawal from her father's legacy. Unlike her half-siblings who would become public defenders or managers of Che's image, Hildita remained on the margins. She was the forgotten first child. Hilda Beatriz Guevara Gadea died on August 21, 1995, in Havana. She was 39 years old. The cause of death was cancer. She left behind her son, Canek, who was in his early teens. Canex Sanchez Guevara would later become a writer and punk musician. He publicly rejected his grandfather's ideology, describing the Cuban system as oppressive and hypocritical. In interviews, he spoke about the burden of the Guevara name and the cost of revolutionary mythology on real people's lives. He died in 2015 at the age of 40. Hildita's story is one of marginalization. She was born into upheaval, raised in absence, and spent her adult life trying to exist outside the shadow of a man she barely knew. Her death at 39 closed a chapter that had never fully opened. Aleida Guevara March was born on November 24, 1960, in Havana, Cuba. She was the first child of Che Guevara and Aleida March, his second wife. Unlike Hildita, Aleida was born into the heart of the revolution. Her father was a commander, a government minister, the public face of Cuba's new order. Her birth occurred during a period of intense political transformation. Cuba had severed ties with the United States. The government was nationalizing industry. Che was traveling internationally, representing Cuba at the United Nations and in communist capitals. Aleida's early childhood was marked by her father's increasing absence. By 1965, when she was 4 years old, Che had left Cuba secretly to fight in the Congo. He returned briefly, then departed again for Bolivia. Aleida has said in interviews that she has no real memories of her father. He was a presence in photographs, not in daily life. When Che was killed in Bolivia in 1967, Aleida was 6 years old. She grew up knowing her father only through state commemoration, through stories told by her mother, and through the omnipresent iconography of his image. Aleida attended Cuban schools and later studied medicine at the University of Havana. Her choice of medicine was deliberate. Her father had been a doctor. He had written extensively about the role of medicine in revolutionary practice. Aleida followed that path, not out of obligation, but out of genuine interest in public health. She completed her medical degree in the 1980s and specialized in pediatrics. Her career would be defined by service, not politics. Aleida Guevara March chose to become a doctor rather than a political figure. This was a significant decision. As the most prominent child of Che's second family, she could have pursued a career in government or party leadership. She did not. Instead, she worked in Cuban hospitals and clinics. She treated children. She participated in Cuba's medical internationalism programs, which sent doctors to underserved countries. She positioned herself as a practitioner, not an ideologue. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, Aleida participated in medical missions to Nicaragua, Ecuador, Angola, and other countries. These missions were part of Cuba's broader foreign policy strategy. But for Aleida, they were also a continuation of her father's stated belief that medicine should serve the poor. She worked in rural clinics. She treated malaria, malnutrition, preventable diseases. She returned to Cuba between deployments. She lived modestly by all accounts. In the 2000s, Aleida began giving interviews and writing about her father's legacy. She published articles and gave lectures in Europe, Latin America, and occasionally in the United States. Her tone was measured. She defended her father's ideals but avoided dogmatism. She has described Che as a man who believed in justice and was willing to sacrifice for it. She has acknowledged the complexity of his legacy. She has not made herself into a political figure, but she has not hidden either. Aleida is married and has children, though she has kept details about her family largely private. She has spoken publicly about the challenge of raising children while carrying the Guevara surname. She has said that her children know who their grandfather was, but that she does not impose the legacy on them. Her family life is ordinary. She has worked to create normalcy in a situation defined by historical weight. Aleida Guevara March has described her relationship with her father's legacy as complicated but not conflicted. She believes in the principles he articulated. She does not defend every action he took. She has said that the poster of Che Guevara is not her father. It is a symbol others have created. She has spent her adult life trying to translate revolutionary ideals into practical action. Medicine became her form of continuity. Service replaced rhetoric. She remains the most publicly visible of Che's children, but she has shaped that visibility carefully, on her own terms. Camilo Guevara March was born on May 20th, 1962, in Havana. He was named after Camilo Cienfuegos, the revolutionary commander and Che's close friend who had died in a plane crash in 1959. His birth occurred during a critical period. His father was serving as Minister of Industries. The Cuban Missile Crisis would occur 5 months later. Camilo was born into a household preparing for conflict. His father was writing economic treatises and preparing for possible war. His mother was managing 4 young children in a country under blockade. Like his sister Aleida, Camilo has no direct memories of his father. Che left Cuba in 1965 when Camilo was 3 years old. He was killed in Bolivia in 1967 when Camilo was 5. Camilo grew up with his father as an absence, a photograph, a national monument. He has said in interviews that he learned who his father was from school textbooks, not from personal recollection. The man was a curriculum, not a parent. Camilo studied law at the University of Havana. His education was thorough and conventional by Cuban standards. He did not pursue a revolutionary career abroad. He did not join the military in a prominent capacity. He completed his degree and began working within Cuban institutions. His early adulthood was marked by deliberate quiet positioning. He was building a foundation for institutional work. In the 1990s, Camilo began working with the Cuban government on projects related to his father's legacy. This was not accidental. The Cuban state had always controlled Che's image and intellectual property. Camilo entered this work as a family representative and as a state functionary. He became involved in archival research, reviewing documents, writings, and photographs related to his father's life. He participated in the preparation of official biographies and exhibitions. In 2001, Camilo became the director of the Centro de Estudios Che Guevara, the Che Guevara Study Center in Havana. The center was established to preserve, research, and disseminate Che's writings and legacy. It held documents, photographs, personal effects, and research materials. As director, Camilo controlled access to materials. He approved or denied requests from biographers, filmmakers, and researchers. He managed the intellectual property of one of the most commodified images in the world. Camilo Guevara. March became the gatekeeper of his father's image. He pursued copyright claims against companies using Che's likeness without authorization. He worked with Cuban authorities to block or approve commercial uses of the image. He positioned himself as the defender of his father's legacy against commodification, even as that legacy was itself a commodity. He gave interviews occasionally. His tone was protective, sometimes defensive. He spoke about the importance of preserving the real Che Guevara against distortion. He became a bureaucrat of a myth. Camilo Guevara. March died on August 29, 2022, in Caracas, Venezuela. He was 60 years old. He had been traveling as part of a state delegation. The cause of death was reported as a heart attack. His death was sudden and unexpected. Cuban state media mourned him as a defender of his father's legacy. His funeral was attended by government officials. He was buried in Cuba with state honors. Camilo spent his adult life managing a myth he could not fully control. He was born too late to know his father and spent 60 years managing the memory of a man he learned about from archives. Celia Guevara. March was born on June 14, 1963, in Havana. She was named after Che's mother, Celia de la Serna, who had been a significant influence on his early life. Celia was the third child of Che and Aleida March. Like her siblings, she was born into the revolution's second wave after the initial euphoria had given way to institutionalization. Her early childhood was similar to that of Aleida and Camilo. Her father was absent, then gone entirely. She was 4 years old when he was killed. Celia Guevara. March is the least publicly known of Che's children with Aleida March. She has given almost no interviews. She has not written publicly about her father. She has not participated in state commemorations or legacy management projects. Her withdrawal from public visibility appears to be deliberate. She chose a life outside the narrative her siblings inhabited. Celia studied veterinary medicine at the University of Havana. Her choice of field was significant. Veterinary science is respected in Cuba but does not carry the ideological weight of medicine or law. It is practical, technical, and allows for a career outside political visibility. She completed her degree in the 1980s and began working in scientific research related to animal health. Celia has worked for many years at the National Aquarium of Cuba in Havana. She has been involved in research on marine life, animal care, and conservation. Her work is technical and scientific. It does not invite public attention. Colleagues have described her as private, professional, and uninterested in discussing her family background. She has built a career that functions independently of her surname. Celia has contributed to veterinary and marine biology research in Cuba. She has co-authored scientific papers on animal health and aquatic species management. Her work is published in Cuban scientific journals, not international media. Her contributions are credible and professional. They exist entirely outside the Che Guevara narrative. Celia Guevara, March has chosen not to engage with her father's legacy publicly. This is not rejection. She has not denounced him or the Cuban system. It is withdrawal. She has created a life where her surname is incidental, not defining. Among Che's children, Celia represents the possibility of anonymity. She is proof that proximity to a historical figure does not require participation in their mythology. She has simply lived a different life. Ernesto Guevara. March was born on February 24, 1965, in Havana. He was named after his father. This was both an honor and a burden. He was born during the period when Che was secretly fighting in the Congo. His father returned briefly to Cuba in early 1966, saw his son as an infant, and then left for Bolivia. Ernesto was 2 years old when his father was executed. He has no memories of him. Ernesto grew up in post-1967 Cuba, when his father's image was already being transformed into a state symbol. Schools had portraits of Che on the walls. His speeches were taught. His writings were curriculum. Ernesto Guevara March attended schools where his father was a subject of study. He has described the experience as surreal. Teachers would speak about Che Guevara, the revolutionary, then look at Ernesto Guevara, the child. Classmates knew who he was. Expectations were constant. Ernesto studied in Cuba and later in the Soviet Union. Like many children of Cuban elites, he was sent to the USSR for advanced technical education. He studied engineering and returned to Cuba in the 1980s. His education prepared him for technical work within the Cuban system. He was trained to serve the state, as his father's children were expected to do. Ernesto served in the Cuban military and participated in overseas deployments, likely to Angola or other countries where Cuba maintained a military presence during the Cold War. He has not discussed these experiences in detail publicly, but they are consistent with the trajectories of many young Cuban men in the 1980s. His military service was unremarkable by Cuban standards. He fulfilled his obligations and returned to civilian life. In the 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the beginning of Cuba's special period, Ernesto transitioned out of formal state service. The economy was collapsing. Soviet subsidies had ended. Many Cubans were seeking alternative livelihoods. Ernesto began working in motorcycle tourism, leading tours through Cuba. This was both practical and symbolic. His father had traveled Latin America by motorcycle in the early 1950s, a journey later mythologized in The Motorcycle Diaries. Ernesto established a motorcycle touring business in Cuba. He led foreign tourists through the countryside, showing them historical sites, natural landscapes, and Cuban culture. He spoke multiple languages and used his technical knowledge to maintain vintage motorcycles. The work connected him to his father's early life, but it was also a way to earn a living outside the state system. He operated in the emerging private sector, navigating Cuba's economic reforms. Ernesto has given occasional interviews, more frequently than Celia but less than Aleida or Camilo. He has spoken about the challenge of carrying his father's name. He has described it as both a privilege and a burden. People have expectations. They project their own beliefs onto him. He has said that he respects his father's ideals but is not interested in becoming a political symbol himself. He has tried to live his own life. Ernesto is married and has children. He has kept his family life private. In interviews, he has said that he does not impose his father's legacy on his children. They know who their grandfather was, but Ernesto has tried to give them space to define themselves. His family life is ordinary by Cuban standards. He has worked to create normalcy. Ernesto Guevara, March, has described living with his surname as a constant negotiation. Everywhere he goes, people recognize the name, they ask questions, they make assumptions. Some admire his father, others despise him. Ernesto exists in between. He has said that he cannot escape the name, so he has learned to carry it without letting it define him entirely. He is Ernesto Guevara's son, but he is also Ernesto Guevara March, a man who fixes motorcycles and leads tours through the Cuban countryside. As of 2024, Ernesto Guevara March is 59 years old and still living in Cuba. He continues to work in tourism when conditions allow. He participates occasionally in family commemorations but does not seek public attention. He has positioned himself as neither defender nor critic of his father's legacy. He acknowledges the complexity, he lives with the consequences. He has built a life that exists alongside the myth, neither consumed by it nor entirely free from it. Che Guevara had 5 children. One died at 39, largely forgotten. One became a doctor and public intellectual. One became the bureaucrat of his father's archive. One chose science and anonymity. One learned to live with a name that belonged to history before it belonged to him. None of them chose their father. None of them chose the revolution. None of them chose the poster or the T-shirt or the global mythology that turned a man into a symbol. What happened to Che Guevara's children is this. They lived. They made careers. They raised families. They navigated the weight of a surname that carried more history than any one person should be expected to bear. Revolutionary legacy does not translate cleanly into real life. It fractures. It scatters. It becomes 5 separate stories, each negotiating the distance between myth and ordinary existence. This is what happened. This is what remains.